It's the film of sex and drugs and rock and roll.
It's more that kind of Armageddon, that kind of apocalyptic feel that happened in the end of the 60s.
It was the new wave, which represented what the youth of England and Western Europe was feeling at that time.
Swinging 60s in London.
Big social revolution going on here.
Performance is a reflection of the 60s.
In the 60s, you could get something together. We said, look, we're going to make this movie.
It remains to this day one of the 2 or 3 most astonishing experiences in a cinema that I've ever had. The 60s has often been described as a time of sex and drugs and rock and roll, and it's true.
People were experimenting with drugs for the first time. People using heroin, coke, marijuana, uppers, downers, LSD, you name it. You know, 60s was the sort of birth moment of that kind of culture. And that had a big influence, definitely.
If you go back, there's a genre of Hollywood films. They're called swinging London films, and they are terrible. This film does it. It's there. There's 2 girls and a guy in a bath talking about whether they should wash their hair. There's drugs being taken completely casually without any excitement or reference. This is a new world. And Performance is certainly the first British film that showed us that world. And Jagger was the incarnation of all this. He was the person that they were warning their children against, and he was the person their children wanted to be like. And Performance brought him onto the screen. He'd never been on the screen before. Nobody like that had ever been on the screen before. So you really do have a film which captures a large part of the 60s with the incredible resources of Roeg's eye and with Cammell's mind.
I've never seen that sort before.
Well, Donald obviously had been very much part of the scene, the Chelsea scene in the 50s and as an artist, etc. But then at a certain point, he went to Paris and became disillusioned with the whole thing. He felt that, in a way, painting was passé. And he got drawn to movies. He felt that the future lay there. But he was no longer part of the swinging 60s in London scene. And he was in Paris, which had its own scene.
The new wave for Donald Cammell was it. He was living in Paris. He had a sort of an atelier, studio, come apartment on the left bank. And he was meeting those filmmakers and writers and actors and talking to them, and was tremendously excited by their concepts and ideas.
I met him through his girlfriend. She was a supermodel. She was a gorgeous Texan girl called Deborah. And we became friends. And then eventually Donald tried to pull me. And then when I met Brian Jones and when I started to hang out with him, I kind of was his idol because that was his dream kind of type come true. You know, you want to be like half Mick Jagger, half Brian Jones.
Donald had already been working on it. In other words, there was a treatment. We'd had quite an extensive treatment that probably was 25 or 30 pages long.
I remember once we went to Saint-Tropez for a weekend and he had this kind of pages of written stuff and they all fell in the water, and so we had to all get them out and then iron them. So I actually ironed the script of Performance.
The moment where Performance takes off is the moment when Cammell comes back to London from Paris, and he locks himself into a flat with a guy called David Litvinoff.
David Litvinoff was a fascinating character, and he got involved with the underworld, the gangster element, the Kray brothers.
Litvinoff really knew these people.
I said shut your bloody hole!
He was moving in that world, the world between rock and roll and violence.
Performance is a film which is drawing on a vast reservoir of material.
I was an agent, and amongst my clients was Mick Jagger and the Stones. Mick wanted to work in films. I was representing Donald Cammell, I was representing the Stones, and discussing with Donald ideas for movies and the fact that we believed in each other, we had some kind of connection. I thought, why not? Let's go for it.
Right from the beginning, it was gangster meets pop star.
Originally written for Marlon Brando and Mick Jagger. That was the original intention. This was going to be a vehicle for those two.
They can't cast Brando, he's not going to play a Cockney criminal, and they cast James Fox. On the one hand, obvious, James Fox was probably the biggest young leading actor in British cinema at that time. On the other hand, completely unobvious.
Let's go.
What do you mean?
Harry Flowers is waiting for you.
Almost all the types he's played have been upper-class figures quite like himself. And then Litvinov, he's called a dialogue coach in the final credits of the film, but he sends him off to South London. And Fox lives there for 2 or 3 months. And he comes back as Chaz. He's got the clothes, he's got the accent, and he's also got the violence.
What did I tell you? What did I tell you? Look at his guy!
James immersed himself in this world of boxing, of small-time crime, of violence, etc. And he went far beyond anything I ever expected he would be able to do as an actor. He's a brilliant actor.
Donald came up and asked me to be in a film because they had it all together. I mean, there was loads of talk of Mick, whether I should do it, I shouldn't do it. Keith would always say, how much are you going to get for this film? I give you the money, don't do the film. And he didn't understand that I wanted just to do something that I wanted to do.
Michelle was an invention of Donald's, and he cast the young girl to fit his invention. I mean, it was not only his fantasy, but his reality, this menage a trois, and it was part of his scene.
So all of these contacts of Cammell appear on the screen, and then to climax it, they have hired Johnny Shannon as a dialogue coach to teach James Fox how to speak with their voice. And then, in a really brilliant last-minute decision, they cast him as Harry Flowers, someone who's never acted before.
Who do you think you are? The Lone Ranger?
I know who I am, Harry.
Of course you do, son. You're Jack the Lad.
Obviously, Mick was established as a superstar, really, at that point, and that, in fact, would have been the great attraction when Sandy Lieberson put together the deal with Warner Brothers.
I told the people that I was working for, it was ICM by them, that I was going to become a producer. They tried to talk me out of it, but I said, no, I want to do it, and let's do it together. They put the deal together with Warner Brothers literally in 72 hours.
Sandy had done the deal, and Donald had never directed a film before, Nick Roeg had never directed a film before, and Sandy Lieberson had never produced a film before.
Nick Roeg, he was going to be the co-director. He would be responsible as part of his co-directing for the look of the film, the textures, the colors, how it was going to be lit, etc. But even that was a shared experience between Nick and Donald. They both brought their ideas to the visual side of it. But Nick was always a partner. He was always the co-director of the film.
Nick, shall we say, he was the technical director. I mean, he decided the setup and obviously the lighting because he was the DP as well. And Donald did the actual directing of actors.
The two of them became a single focus on the story and the characters and what was being said. So it was an intimate relationship. They were on the set together, they were having dinner together, they were talking together, they were drinking together, smoking together, whatever. So it was an incredibly intense, personal, and exciting relationship to see.
At a certain point, it was Nick Roeg who actually invited me out to dinner and asked me if I would produce the film. I discussed it with Donald and Nick, and I suggested that this particular subject and the way the film was scripted, we could shoot the whole thing on location. Having said that, of course, where do you find a great mansion house in the centre of London, which is actually empty?
Loads of people now always go in London, oh, Power Square, Power Square. That's where you shot Performance, isn't it? And it's not. I
suddenly remembered a crumbling mansion in Lowndes Square, and we moved in and built some of the sets within the house as well. So, in fact, the opening apartment in the garden sequence and the kitchen sequences and various other things were shot in there. That's actually a set that was built in the living room of the house in Lowndes Square. And Power Square is purely the exterior, because the actual exterior of the Lowndes Square wasn't as good as the Power Square.